Hello, everyone. Good day. My name is Anthony Mills. I am the Executive Director of Global Innovation Institute, and I would like to welcome you to our December 2024 webinar. Today is Tuesday, December 10th, 2024, and this is our webinar for this month. As many of you know, we host webinars once a month with esteemed thought leaders from around the world talking about innovation, transformation, disruption, and a lot of other subjects so that we can continue to broaden and develop our knowledge of this field of work. Thank you again for joining us for our webinar today. What I'd like to do now is to introduce you to our guest speaker for today. After I introduce him, I'll turn it over to him to be to lead our discussion. So our guest today is Mr. Greg Bernarda. Greg is the initiator of the Up-ruption concept, for which he was nominated in 2023 for the Thinkers 50 Strategy Award. He is also a co-author of the best-selling book, Value Proposition Design, the sequel to Business Model Generation. He is a globally sought-after keynote speaker and periodically teaches Strategizer's flagship masterclass. He is also the original producer of a brand new advanced masterclass on ecosystems in China, with new locations opening around the world in 2024. Today, Greg guides leaders around the world in working collaboratively to invent the future they really want. He believes that 21st century leaders lead ecosystems, not just organizations. In doing so, they access dynamics of value creation that unlock radically new opportunities and lead to better outcomes for all involved. Greg's clients range from across different sectors and geographies, and amongst others include Danone, Colgate-Palmolive, Baxter, Michelin, Volkswagen, ABB, MasterCard, Roche, Richemont, Tencent, Alibaba, Peking University, and Harvard Business School. Prior to establishing his advisory practice, Greg co-founded several collaboration event platforms, including the Hanwang Forum in Beijing, China, the Lift Lab in Geneva, Switzerland, and the annual NOE program in Evian, France. He also worked for a decade at the World Economic Forum, engaging members in tackling global and industry challenges. He is an appointed member of the Business Ecosystems Alliance, a joint venture of Hire and Thinkers 50, and of the Catalyst Network in Melbourne, Australia. Greg holds an MA in Political Science from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland, and an MBA from the Said Business School at the University of Oxford, where he was nominated Associate at the Martin School. After a decade abroad, Greg returned to his native Switzerland, where he happily lives in Zurich. He can be found online at gregbernarda.com and at up-ruption.com, where he publishes the Art of Up-ruption newsletter. Today, Greg is going to be talking to us about Up-ruption, which he defines as embracing the energy of disruption and undoing things that are stuck, and the energy of recreation in stewarding a new equilibrium that fosters wholeness and thriving. As innovation leaders, this is incredibly important to us because, as Greg notes, the language of business is too small for our time. We need an approach that can take in far more complexity and subtlety. And 21st century leaders have to unlock new value creation by acting more like a mayor than a CEO. So with that, please join me now, if you will, in welcoming Mr. Greg Bernarda. Greg, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Hello, everyone. So I'm very glad to be with you all. I'm gonna share a few slides with you today. I'm gonna see if you can see my slides in a second.
Yes.
Give me a thumbs up. Okay, perfect. Excellent. So I'll share a few thoughts around these topics that you see on the screen that Anthony has introduced: organization to ecosystem, this from disruption to upruption. I'll also ask you to engage a little bit in the course of these presentations, maybe through the chat window, so that we can have a bit more of an interactive dialogue. And then I think we'll have more time at the end to converse. So I want to do that right away, actually. I'd love to hear from you in the chat why you are here today, what you'd like to get out of this session. You've heard a few topics here: ecosystem, disruption, up-ruption, innovation. What would you ideally like to get out of the session today? If there's 1, 2, 3 things that you can write in the chat, that'd be wonderful, and then we'll try and circle back to those in the course of the presentation and at the end. So I'll give you half a minute to do that. Get more perspective on how effectively leading ecosystems. Let's get a few more, get ourselves warmed up. And any question is great. It's a very complex topic, so it's always good to hear from everyone, you know, what their question, what their vantage point is, and where their questions come from. So up-ruption, learning what up-ruption is. Great. So keep getting them into innovation. So keep writing them in the chat, and I'll get us started. So I'll give you my context, my curiosity, and my interrogations. I see a lot of organizations, and when I say organizations, it can be businesses, it can be not-for-profits, it can be any type of organizations that are trying to unlock new growth or new impact, whatever that means for them. And often they feel a little bit constrained in the, you know, shareholders want things, my leader wants something else, you know, the legal system is such that we can do one thing but not another. And so it feels like there's a bit of a straitjacket sometimes in terms of unlocking new value for our organization and the people we want to serve. That's one perspective. Another perspective is obviously we see a lot of issues that have a systemic nature around, you know, on our planet. So societal issues, environmental issues, and whether you are a not-for-profit or a government organization or a business, more and more you have to have a, you know, a point of view and a way of understanding how you play in these systems and how ultimately you can also contribute to bettering these situations. So that's a second piece of context. And the last piece of context is a more personal one. Here's an individual, some of you might know him, Jaron Lanier is one of the pioneers of virtual communities in Silicon Valley. He's a tech person and an artist, as well as one of the fiercest critiques of tech-based business models. Published a lot of books around that. He's featured in a Netflix documentary called Social Dilemma. Some of you might have seen it. So I heard him say this in a podcast not too long ago. He says the higher up somebody is in a tech company in Silicon Valley, the more restrictive they are about the kids' access to internet technology. I'm saying this is a bit of more of a personal piece of context, as it feels like, you know, the most intelligent of us go to work in the morning, put all of their creativity and their intelligence onto, you know, building systems and technology and fantastic tools, etc. And then they go home at night, and the first thing they do is protect their kids and tell their kids, don't touch this thing I've just created the whole day, right? Put all of my creativity to make this thing happen. So it feels a little bit schizophrenic. And I think as individuals, you know, for our own health, as well as for the health of our organizations and the health of our systems and societal, you know, well-being in general, that can't be the best way moving forward. So I add up all of these kind of perspectives. And as Anthony has said already, I come to the conclusion that the language of business is too small for our time. And I also think this is a period where you see a lot of other ways that are emerging across the world, across sectors, across types of organizations, where people are already rising to a higher logic of value creation. What I mean by a high logic of value creation is that we can get to a place that is not theoretical, not abstract, that is very much practical, but where these usual conflicts of, say, economic value against societal value, against environmental value, no longer really needs to, you know, be, you know, one against the other, where we are actually able to rise to a logic of value creation that creates value for from all perspectives. And I think this is one of the challenges of our time, really, is in the zeitgeist, as we say. And so my response to this is work in progress. I call this up-ruption. Up-ruption is it's both a play on word on disruption, but it is also a real thing of saying, well, disruption can, it's a great logic that has driven a lot of value creation, but especially with a certain vantage point. If you're in the startup world, you want to disrupt, etc. Your vantage point is typically the vantage point of your organization. Now, if you broaden this vantage point to the vantage point of your sector or your or society or the community, well, disruption is not great news. So, but we still want to use this energy of disruption when things are outdated and need to be, shaken up a little. But as we release some energy, well, we also have an opportunity of unlocking the higher value that is, kind of latent in our ecosystems and our systems and our sectors. So the image that I'll give you today is if you have an ecosystem here, this is the ecosystem of your sector, let's say. Well, disruption kind of moves value sideways, right? It changes maybe the people that are benefiting from the value of that is generated in this ecosystem. Whereas up-ruption, the intention of up-ruption is actually to lift the whole field up so that we are ending up with a better way of serving, whatever we are, the object of our work is, whether you are in education, mobility, or healthcare, it's kind of the next version up of that theme. And in the process, we're also lifting the whole ecosystem upwards with as many people as possible. I'll give you some examples. I'll shift my presentation. I'll split my presentation in 3 episodes. The first aspect of this is the idea of shifting to a larger purpose. And I'll give you a piece of context. So I was working with the World Economic Forum for a long time, almost a decade. And this was a place that actually really impacted me in our ability to care for larger issues by coming together from all sorts of, vantage points in society, all sorts of sectors in society. But after a while, I also realized, there is something a little bit tired in the format. Of course, we're talking about wonderful topics, large topics, but people were sleeping in 5-star hotels, eating really well. If you looked outside the window, it looked beautiful. You could go skiing. Fantastic ski resort in Switzerland, absolutely fantastic. And so I thought, well, is this really going to be where we are changing and updating our models of value creation? Because this feels quite comfortable. So I left the WEF and I went to China, and this was a key moment in my own journey. I actually found myself in rooms that looked very similar to that of the World Economic Forum, very similar conversations about systemic issues, industrialization models, new models of value creation. But if I looked outside, the view was very different. This was around 2010, peak pollution in Beijing. You could actually not see the bottom of the street. And so for me, at a very personal level, it was very meaningful because at that point, it really clicked that, the abstract kind of theoretical conversation in the room, well, were taking place in a context where there was a big need for those kind of systemic conversations. And it wasn't just about the environment, it was also about, job creation, food safety, and so on and so forth. And so this is the context of China in, early century. Of course, different place today, some issues still there, but it really inspired me to actually look for what was already going on in China there were going to be responses to that kind of to those kinds of contexts. And as I say that, I'm not saying look outside your window and is there pollution or not today, but I'm saying, can you see in your sectors, in your even in your life, what are some of the issues that are latent and that are visible and invisible that we're not really talking about, right? and what can we do about it? So in the case of China, this was the time when Jack Ma and Alibaba were very, very popular. Of course, Jack Ma had his own story in the last years, his own evolution. But at the time, everybody pointed me to Jack Ma and Alibaba, and in particular, this part of the Alibaba business called Taobao, which really had changed their lives. This is back, so the origin of Taobao is in 2003, when the state of the Chinese economy is really, is nothing to compare to the state of what the Chinese economy is today. Lots of poverty, actually, government very busy lifting people out of poverty, and so on and so forth. So this is a very different story than our own story of what e-commerce has generated in terms of value in the West. Kind of a layer applied to a very well-functioning economy in many cases. This is more of a transformational story. And so I started to look at this, and I asked myself, what is going on here that I can learn from this context that we can also bring, to our context and to any context around the world? And so I started to ask myself, what are those leaders doing that's different? So Alibaba is one story. I'll share some other quick anecdotes along this presentation. But one of the things that I realized is that they're playing at a different level. And one of the key things that they start with is that they don't just start with a business mission, right? It's not just about, I want to sell more of my products, right? It's all about having a purpose that's large enough for the theme that you want to take care of, right? And as you are engaging other people into an ecosystem, well, you'll want a vision in that's a purpose that's large enough for people to be inspired to follow you, and for them to find a way to get value for themselves in the process. So I'll give you some examples. So in the case of Taobao, I actually spent quite a time with the executives that were with Jack Ma at the very beginning of the process, and they shared that even down to the operational KPI of the startup at the beginning was not how many subscriptions we're going to sell, how many packages we're going to ship across China. It was all about how many jobs are we creating. How many jobs are we creating was the currency of value creation for this new system that would bring e-commerce into China. And of course, this was I'm saying this is the currency of the system because it was inscribed in this context of we need to lift people out of poverty. We need to create entrepreneurship, creativity, economic independence in many ways. If you look at Tesla for me is another case of, there's obviously, the leader of Tesla now that has, different roles. But if you just look at Tesla, the organization, what it has done, well, from the beginning, it was also not just about building sports car. It was all about moving towards solar electric economy, right? So not a business only purpose. There's something in there that is about let's change society, let's change this theme that we're busy with here in a radical and transformative way. This is a blog post of Elon Musk back in 2006. It's still on their website, on the Tesla website, and it tells us already in 2006, this is not about car. The overarching purpose of Tesla is actually to transition towards a solar electric economy. And so today, I think it is interesting to see that today we can actually see it's not just about cars, it's about the solar panels, about the gigafactories, it's about the power walls, and so on and so forth. More traditional company, Roche, which I've done a lot of work with. Well, Roche is trying to do the same thing, from moving, from just being a drug manufacturer, being very good at R&D, very good at marketing, towards this promise of personalized health at a lower cost to society. Kind of seeing that our healthcare systems are coming under pressure, dwindling budgets, at the same time as science is evolving, data is playing is unlocking a lot new value. And so they're seeing that they are positioned in a way to create a whole new value proposition to the system, to society, And of course, they need to start working in a different way, collaborating with other actors, and so on and so forth. We can talk more about that later on. The key thing here is that these organizations, every organization on the planet that has a website will tell you they have a societal purpose. The key thing is this a marketing trick, or is this the authentic intention of the organization? And it's really about looking at the products and services they deliver. Are the tangible products and services actually doing what this societal purpose is, right? Is this really about creating jobs, about moving towards our electric economy, about personalized health at lower cost, etc.? So that's the first thing. And when we run these kind of processes with organizations, there is a moment that we spend asking deeper questions, because often what we see is that we're kind of stuck in a particular way of thinking about our domain, our way of value creating, and we don't often stop to ask some of those deeper questions. What do people really need beyond what they're saying they want, right? Beyond saying I want more and faster and cheaper, right? No, what is it really that is moving people? What needs to get unstuck in the system, in the patterns of value creation? What is the highest potential of this thing that we're in this community and this group of people that we want to serve? Let's spend some time to understand here what is really the new meaning that can be unlocked so that it can lead to new value for people. Again, we can come back to some of how we do this, but if you look at Taobao, the whole identity of the Taobao organization was not, how are we going to lower price, in the context of 2003 in this Chinese economy. It wasn't just about lowering prices, faster delivery or more convenience within this physical economic paradigm. No, it's actually to leverage e-commerce as a way of creating massive transformational value for the collective, for the sector, for society, right? Around economic independence, around actually enabling entrepreneurship. Might know a lot of people started to open online shops and create massive value that way, even unleashing their creativity. So, and you can hear Jack Ma, and I think this is a very consistent thing that comes up from these leaders, that they say it's not just about technology for technology, it's what can technology enable in creating larger value. And of course, if we're able to do this, then we'll be able to create a business model where we can capture value out of it as well. And the results, of course, it's not just about trusting the kind of the narrative here. It's all about looking at the results. And Jack Ma was saying, well, we're not just building an e-commerce company for ourselves. We're kind of creating the foundation so that new value can be created. In the space of my own research on the topic, 16 million new jobs are attributed to Taobao, net new jobs. In the space of 5 years. There's lots of anecdotes without going too much into details of how even the way people interacted in a commerce context changed. Even with online, all of a sudden they started to address themselves with dear seller, dear buyer, whereas before there was a large climate of suspicion in commercial relationships. Put rural China on the map. You might know a lot of there was a lot of migration to the cities to find jobs, where in so many ways this e-commerce play has kind of reversed the trend, where a lot of these villages started to become thriving, booming villages where people started to open shops from where they live, and hiring the community and so on and so forth. So that's the first episode. The second episode is it's not just about shifting your purpose to kind of a business to a societal purpose, but it's also shifting how you are organizing yourself. And so second episode is all about shifting from an organizational mindset to an ecosystem mindset. Here I'll use, as part of my trip when kind of in parallel to my trip to China, I was starting to work with my friend here, Alex Osterwalder. Some of you, I'm sure many of you actually know the business model canvas, which has been a tool that has revolutionized, the way we think about value creation. Well, I wanted to understand the inner workings of Taobao and understand how they were really creating value. And so these tools, so this is part of the methodology we use. Maybe some of you recognize the books here. But when I applied this to Taobao, I realized, again, without going into too much details, what you see up on the screen here is that Taobao went through a succession of business model reinventions. Right? And those of you who are in the space of innovation, you know it's already hard to create a business model that has traction in the market. It's even harder to reinvent yourself every time and almost disrupt yourself in the process. So this was a fantastic story of business model innovation for sure. But there was also something else that I couldn't quite put in the business model box. Things like building trust, building the infrastructure of digital payments, which didn't exist in China, facilitating the emergence of a separate industry of, the equivalent of your FedEx or UPS, right, to ship these goods around. Creating a university for these budding entrepreneurs, integrating all sorts of actors in the value chain, etc. In other words, there were things that normally, as a normal business, the way you learn business at business school, the way we've learned it for the last 50 years, normally these kind of things are part of the environment. And what you do is you come in and you ask yourself, is my idea fit for the time? And if I don't see a few things in the environment that support my idea, well, I go home. It's timing is not right. I put it back on the shelf and maybe I come back later. In this case here, and this is very consistent across ecosystem players, is that they take a larger responsibility, think beyond their own business model of how to bring these different elements together. Well, they think one level up and one level broader to intervene in their environment, change the environment so that their business idea can become successful. And so if I decode this, I was curious about how we can think about this in terms of value creation. And I'll ask you, where you feel your organization is in terms of value creation in a second. But before I do that, let me tell you what those different levels are. So the first lens, so the first level of value creation is what we call the value proposition, right? And so here what you see is the tool, the value proposition canvas, which we've created as part of the same methodology, same language. And so one example is GoPro. You identify your customer segment, hard enough to do, understand what their pains and jobs, pains and gains are, their problems, their needs. And if you do that well, where you can create something that matches their needs, right, in a compelling way. And so that's the foundational layer of value creation. People need to do that for any level of innovation. But of course, what we learned, especially with Alex, is that people, the organizations that are most successful, they don't just innovate at the level of products and services. They actually think about what is the formula of value creation that adds all of these other things around the products and the services. So this is the business model canvas. And again, not going to go into too much detail here, but can you think beyond your just product innovation and service innovation? Can you think about the channels, the customer relationship to your consumers? What are key resources that you need to really own and cultivate? The partners you want to work with, the type of revenue streams you play with, and so on and so forth. And so the key foundational example here, which we've gone around the world to illustrate this business model framework with, is Nespresso. The story of Nespresso is that this is a Nestle company originally. A few engineers in the garage in Switzerland here invented the machine, with the machine and the pods, the whole system, tried to put it to the market for 10 years and failed for 10 years. And it was interesting because they were using the same mindset and the same template of value creation as the usual template of value creation that the parent company Nestle uses. Nestle is typically a B2B company, and Nespresso first was attempted to be launched through a B2B lens in the same way, trying to sell these coffee machines to offices around the world. And of course, offices, if you try to do that, you have to go through a procurement process. The procurement guy says, well, we already have a machine here, so we don't need a second one. So thank you very much. You know, we don't need your new fancy machine. So they understood that it wasn't a B2B business model. It was a B2C business model. It's a consumer brand, you know, it has emotional appeal. So they hired George Clooney, they created a club, and they started to create a whole system here that allowed us to enjoy these machines in the comfort of our home, and then went back to the office later on through that door. So the key thing here is you want to think broader when you think about a formula of value creation. You want to think broader than just products and services by weaving a coherent story, a coherent narrative across these different elements of value creation that you see on screen. Now, the reason I'm here today is to talk about its third lens, and it's the lens of usually what we call the environment. We don't typically call it the ecosystem. We think about it as an environment that can't be changed. And as I was saying earlier, typically you would come in with your idea and you say, hey, what are the technology trends? What are competitors doing? What's the economic climate? And this is the right time to launch my idea. And innovators that play at the level of the ecosystem, and again, Tesla for me is another type of ecosystem, what we call it solution ecosystem. But they don't only innovate at the level of product, you know, the electric cars, obviously. They also innovate at the level of the business model, right? So the idea of not having distributors selling directly to us, but they especially innovate at the level of the ecosystem, right? So they partner with competitors. That's not typically something that you would see as your usual strategic toolbox. They build this massive infrastructure of charging station. You know, they develop deep tech, etc., etc. I'll get a bit more into what this means later on. But the key element here is that they're playing at a bigger level, right? So I'll ask you to put in the chat, and I see there's some questions coming up here, so we can address them in a sec. But tell me what level of value creation you think your organization is playing at. Are you just focused on products and services? So number one, the value proposition. Are you innovating at the level of the business model, like Nespresso or like low cost airline was a popular story of business model innovation? Or are you already thinking about intervening outside of your own business model box to start unlocking new value creation in the ecosystem? So value prop and business model. And I see this, organization, I feel like in the last 10 years, most organizations are graduating beyond just products and services. That's really been this development of thinking about the business model. Business models become a huge buzzword across organizations. 1 and 2. And I actually see, so maybe we're not yet at ecosystem, but I see that this is kind of the next level that is emerging nowadays. So there's a question here, do you mean the ecosystem around the value you're creating? I mean that the ecosystem is not just you, and I'll get a bit into more details in a sec, but when we talk about an ecosystem, it's not just you, your organization, your customers, and your supply chain, but it's all of the organizations that are part of the dynamic of value creation. So I'll give you an example in a sec. But just in terms of the mindset, I like to say that if an ecosystem leader was to go to a business school exam, sometimes in a business school, you have like a piece of work that's supposed to be applied. And so people are, going into their session with the business school professor, and typically a business school professor would say, hey, sit down, let's look if your idea is actually good to go, is if there's potential for a business idea. And typically these are the questions that will come up, right? So is there a market? Have you checked that there's a market? You can plug yourself in. Technology, infrastructure, is it there? Do people want it? Have you checked that? Can they afford it? Typically, an ecosystem leader would have to respond, if they're honest, pretty much no to every one of these questions. Because that's actually the point of ecosystem value creation, is that we are playing beyond the rules of the typical business mindset, right? So if there isn't a market, well, we'll create one. will invest into inventing a new technology, will inspire people to see a new possibility, right? And that includes end users and customers, consumers, as well as the entire industry. We'll help them pay for it if they can't pay for it. So it's actually about creating a whole new system that allows new value to be created that would not be possible otherwise. So these ecosystem leaders, and you see it all the time, you know, they don't really play along the business school book. In fact, a lot of people have left business school before graduating. They kind of fail the business school test, not because they're not good at business, but because they're playing a larger game. They're playing a bigger game. And that mindset and that way of thinking and of navigating value creation is actually not new. If you look at some of these examples of the past 100 years that appear on screen, well, you'll see that individuals or groups of people have actually gone beyond this idea of just entrepreneurship, but more about ecosystem value creation, system building to create value in a new way. This is also true for the future. This is a study. So McKinsey is doing a lot of documentation, a lot of knowledge building around ecosystems. So this is a quote from one of their books, they call it the single largest economic transformation in the history of the planet. 1/3 of global GDP will soon come from ecosystems. So what they see is that this neat way of trying to categorize value creation in by industries, by categories that have become, that have accompanied us during all these years. Are you a food company or health company, or you're a digital company, and so on and so forth? Well, that's not so relevant anymore, right? Because these ecosystem players, they're actually playing across these boundaries. In many ways, they're redefining these boundaries. They are really good at understanding what are the needs of societal needs, people's needs, and then they mobilize different assets in different ways to deliver in a more powerful way to the market. And Taisir, I see your question come up. I think I'm not familiar with market system development. Might be connected, maybe not, but we can come back to it afterwards in the conversation. So the metaphor in terms of how people think of value creation in this world is that if a CEO is focused on their own house, making sure their house works well, people are happy within their house, the house can produce what the house can produce, fantastic, but that's the CEO mindset. And the ecosystem leader's mindset is more about understanding how to care for the entire village, right? It's about playing at the level of the village. And I like to say that they need to think like a good mayor. The job description of an ecosystem leader is very similar to that of a mayor. I need to be in schools, I need to build roads, I need to ensure harmony within the village, maybe how we are connecting to other villages, and so on and so forth. So you see that it's a much broader game. And when I say mayor, I've been using examples that we all recognize, Tesla, Alibaba, etc. So we sometimes have a tendency to think, well, it's just one guy, acting alone. But there's actually a whole range here. At the other end of the spectrum, there's collectives organizing themselves to do this work of village building, so to speak. So we can dive into these examples later on, but I'm working with the construction industry in France that is organizing themselves into a collective to kind of lift the whole paradigm into a new place. And sometimes it's in between. So where it's not about bringing all of the stakeholders of the system, but can we do some mini constellation of actors? There's an example of Roche in Canada, unlocking data access for value creation. Again, we can come back to it. But where this is the equivalent of getting together a bunch of actors to unlock a common asset that then everybody can use and create value from. So we can now ask ourselves, what is an ecosystem, right? So an ecosystem, and you've seen me use this language of value creation around value proposition and business model. the key thing to realize is that it's always understanding both the parts of value creation at every level, right? We know what a business model is made of. It's 9 blocks, and connecting the dots together into a new story of value creation. And so the same thing works at the level of the ecosystem, but we can ask ourselves then, what are the parts of that we can activate? And there's 3 essential parts that I'll share with you in a nutshell. One is who are all of the economic actors? Economic actors can mean public, private, people, organization, doesn't really matter. It's all of the actors that need to get involved in basically delivering on the purpose, right? This societal or collective purpose. And typically what you'll see, so every organization is part of an existing ecosystem, right? So we can map it if you will, we can describe it. But of course, what's interesting is to try and understand how can we unlock more value out of this ecosystem. And the ones who do, what you see is that they're always trying to redefine the boundaries of the ecosystem and often try to pull new actors in new constellations, new collaborations that are shifting the way that the ecosystem can be described and ultimately what value the system creates. The second one is what I call the infrastructure. So infrastructure can be basically all the system, quite tangible system that allows the ecosystem to operate. And again, if you are looking at your own ecosystem, you will see that there might be bridges that you need to make in order to realize your new purpose, holes in the streets to fill, and so on and so forth, right? There's 3 typical types of infrastructure: physical, like Tesla charging stations; digital, maybe the payment system that I referred to in the case of Taobao earlier; and also organizational infrastructure. This is Haier in China is a good example of that. Maybe some of you know the story, but Haier, basically a big conglomerate, I think it's #1 white goods manufacturer now. At some point, they thought, okay, we're a little bit too big, right? So not so entrepreneurial anymore. So we're going to split ourselves into micro enterprises to stimulate entrepreneurship. But we're also going to accompany that with a platform of blockchain, smart contracts, but that allows all of these micro enterprises to collaborate with one another and also with external partners to deliver value in a new way to the market. So this is an example of organizational infrastructure. The last component, if you will, is communal functions. What do I mean by communal functions? Well, in your village, in your neighborhood, someone picks up the trash, right? And this is not a typically an economic actor that is just trying to get value out of the system. So that means that as an ecosystem leader, and again, it could be a collective effort or it could be a more of a concentrated effort in one actor, someone needs to ensure that the whole is functioning well and that all of the actors, all of the parts are able to contribute what they have to contribute. And so some examples, there's some key strategies that keep coming up in these stories of ecosystem transformation. I'll just mention 3 right now. One is inspiring. So you might have seen Intel in one of my slides of the last 100 years. Well, Intel is a great story of ecosystem building in the 90s to stimulate the development of the PC industry. And one of the things they did many things, but one of the things they did is that they realized, well, this PC industry, with all of their actors, this obviously wasn't, the dynamism that we have right now. No, not everyone was really seeing the potential of what a computer could do. So part of what Intel did was to invest into research of new use cases of what a PC could do in the future. So video conferencing, connected home, applications, gaming, and so on and so forth, right? And they did the work of bringing these visions to the rest of the industry to kind of stimulate thinking and create possibility for people to say, yeah, I can play a role in this, right? So inspiring is very often there as a strategy. Upskilling is another really popular strategy, let's say. So this is an example of the university that Alibaba, Taobao created for entrepreneurs. Taobao University. So they saw, they create this platform, this e-commerce platform. They see a massive amount of people even quitting their jobs, opening an online shop online, but then they're not businesswomen and businessmen. So Taobao sees that and they say, okay, we're going to help these people to become basically to run their business on the platform in a way that works so that it can benefit everyone. The last one I'll mention here is it can also be a strategy of enabling the rest of the industry. You may know Tesla at the beginning said, they developed this amazing technology and then they said, well, we're going to share our patents for free with the rest of the industry. Why would they do that? Again, not a classic business school strategy. They do that because they see that if for this electric industry to even take root and have a future, well, they might not be enough Tesla as an organization to carry it. So they enable other actors to carry the load, create a bigger pie. And of course, if the pie becomes bigger, then Tesla can also get a bigger chunk of the pie. The idea here is that, again, so now we know a little bit better what an ecosystem is. And so the idea is, which is kind of a misconception at all levels of value creation, is that it's not just about creating a feature or creating a new marketing strategy, or in the case of the ecosystem, changing the law or lobbying, right? Those are just inputs at those different levels. But the best ones, what they do is that they create a new coherence, right? A new narrative, a new story of value creation that connects these different innovations into a coherent way of creating value. So you're in the presence of a great ecosystem when there is a very coherent story of value creation at that level. And the last thing, and this is going to be shorter, is that none of this is possible, I think, if there is no shift in leadership capacity. I'll use a metaphor from the world of health or mental health. You might know Carl Jung, popular psychologist, psychoanalyst, actually from Zurich, from the town where I live, city where I live. And he said this, he says, if you're a therapist, analyst or therapist, well, you can only go as far in helping your patients as far as you've gone yourself, right? So it's the same for when your object is not a patient, but is an ecosystem. And here I get a lot of inspirations, if you will. This is the parallel, the inner parallel. Inner leadership transformation needs to happen in order to transform these ecosystems. And so for those of you who are curious, this is a great article. It's almost 20 years old, but it's become a classic. I think it's one of the most downloaded on HBR. And what the Rook and Torbert, and they're part of this movement of vertical leadership, they tell us, well, in the world of leadership development, there's the idea that a leader, an adult and a leader, can continue maturing themselves, developing their own capacity. And so they've identified, very well documented as well. So they have these 7 categories. Starts with opportunist. Opportunist is the one leader that's all in for themselves, can really has the capacity only to take care of themselves. Maybe further down, well, some of these guys here, well, they have a larger capacity to take care of the organization. The ones at the bottom, which are really the ones at the top, are those who are actually able to care for this societal or collective transformation. And it's interesting to see these numbers are actually shifting. I think if we were to take a picture now, there's more recent studies that show that the leaders are evolving. So you'll see the percentage being larger in the bottom categories here. And so, so this is the kind of parallel of, if we want to play at the level of ecosystems, what is a more complex thing, right? So we need to bring more nuance. We need to deal with paradoxes that are complicated, many actors wanting different things. And so in order to do that, we have to build the capacity inside ourselves to be able to deal with it. So I'll ask a last question here. If I put these categories up on the screen, you have a little sentence. Maybe you've seen a little bit in the article earlier. I'll ask you to see if you're looking at the leader of your organization, which one do you think, which sentence do you think most corresponds to your leader? Are they an opportunist, all in for themselves? And this is all confidential. No, not kind of confidential. You can answer the way you want. But are they an opportunist? Are they a diplomat? All the way to no, they're actually an alchemist. An alchemist has integrated these other abilities to take care of themselves, take care of the organization, but they are all here to actually move the entire societal play, the ecosystem play in their particular sector. So 766, that's fantastic. So we're in the presence of very capable leaders already. So that's wonderful. And so I'll leave you with this image here. This to kind of summarize the idea of shifting from just focusing on your own business model to the ecosystem, and not just trying to move pieces within the existing ecosystem, but actually lifting the entire ecosystem to its next level of value creation, so that the entire ecosystem can create new value for your sector. If you want to follow updates on Up-ruption, there is a QR code here that leads you to the newsletter. And I'm doing, so for those who are curious to know more, especially if you're at the level of 6, 7, 5, 6, 7. So those of you who are kind of playing with these kind of challenges already, well, I'm offering 2 30-minute free consultations before Christmas, before the holidays. And so if you want to do that, just send me an email at greg@gregbernarda.com, and I'll be really glad to speak with you about your own context or about stories that you see out there. I think this would be a really great conversation. And I'll put both the email and the link. I see your request, Lean, into the chat as we start the conversation. Thank you very much, everyone. And Anthony, back to you.
Thank you so much, Greg. It's an excellent presentation, and we have a lot of good questions over here in the chat that we can turn our attention to. And let's see, where do we want to start? So let's kind of start toward the bottom here. Here's a question from Folashadi. Is it possible for a small or sole entrepreneur to play at this ecosystem, considering all that it involves, especially the infrastructure part? Where does that small entrepreneur play in this ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And so yes is the answer. Actually, the very first client, so to speak, of Up-ruption is a one-man show. He's a chess educator in Australia. And it actually fascinated me that he was attracted to this. So the idea here is that maybe we can differentiate the idea of leading the entire village and transforming the entire village versus having the mindset of creating value for the entire village. And so if you're a one-man show, one-woman show, what you can do is understand what is your role in the ecosystem in order to unlock higher value for that entire ecosystem. And so you might not do everything on your own, but you might understand where to act. What are the dynamics of value creations that you can plug yourselves in, that you can influence in order to play your part in unlocking that new value, right? So even in a very, even if you're not involved in partnerships or anything like that, that is something that this gentleman, first client, is doing in Australia in his own world. And what he's seen that was interesting was, because at first he came into the ecosystem of the chess community with a disruptive offering of chess education, and he saw a lot of backlash. And then he understood, well, no, actually, I can also help the educators that are already established to lift their game. And as soon as he made that shift, he saw a lot of goodwill towards himself, and he saw a lot of new kind of value and new ways that people were interacting with himself and with the entire chess community that was starting to change.
So yeah, change can really start from anywhere, where there's a spark, anyone can be that catalyst to create change. And it really takes people, I think, stepping out. I mean, I do give credit to Elon Musk and at Tesla for having the foresight to say, you know, we're not just a car company, we are here to drive that economic development back over to the solar electric system, and then let's open our patents to the world so that other people can plug into this. I mean, that was a complete ecosystem move, and I thought it was brilliant because like that's going to significantly accelerate the development of this whole ecosystem. Whereas if you just play the traditional business cards, that's why that's one reason why ecosystems and transformation in society take so long to transform sometimes is because businesses play their cards close to their chest. They don't work together. They don't really work together to develop the industry and the economic environment, and that slows things down. So that sort of move definitely accelerates things. So I would agree. Yeah. Comment?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally see this as well, and it's interesting because I think we have kind of pioneers like this, and now a bit like with the business model shift, you know, the shift from product to business model. Now I see that we also start to have the language to be able to do it in a way that is a bit maybe less risky, right? The story of Tesla was a very bumpy ride, very risky ride,
I think
and
it
so
is.
now,
Yeah. And so just also to kind of go here to comment on the comment from, I believe it's Taser, about market system development. So market system development is a program that's taught in developing economies to really help the leaders in the developing economies understand what they have to do to work together to promote those economies. You don't come across this too much in developed economies. You see it more in developing economies, but a lot of it is parallel to this whole concept of building ecosystems and driving ecosystems. In fact, I've been working this year with Monshot, which is the Small and Medium Business Enterprise Authority in Saudi Arabia. And you know that's what we've been trying to do is actually really develop and strengthen the startup ecosystem. And how do we create economic development through growing that startup ecosystem? But there's definitely an ecosystem perspective going on here. And one of the things actually I'll interject is because maybe it's not totally relatable to every ecosystem, but in some ecosystems, the actual ecosystem has its own culture. Okay. And certainly in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, successful ones have their own culture. Why is Silicon Valley so successful? There's actually a certain culture inside the ecosystems where everyone understands the roles they play. They're willing to work together to take certain risks. So, I mean, have you seen this elsewhere? Like, do these ecosystems develop their own sort of cultures, and are there better or worse cultures in them?
I mean, I think there's the way I see it is that there is often a culture that takes root in an ecosystem that then becomes a little bit too established for new ideas to come in, right? So that's a little bit the way. So sure, they have, you know, there's different kinds of cultures, and same way you have different kinds of culture in different villages. I think the metaphor works well for that too. But I see the challenge of the culture taking roots so much that it prevents innovation to happen, right? And often you see it. It's the same phenomenon as you know, when a startup starts. You have the founder. The culture is very clean, very connected with value creation in the market, and all of a sudden that thing becomes a large organization, and everybody's kind of doing something, but has lost the idea of why they were doing it in the first place, right? And so that's where bureaucracy comes in, and so on and so forth. So I think there is an interesting challenge of kind of you know, reconnecting. This is why I also talk about purpose, because purpose, I think, is a very big enabler of transformation in ecosystem. It releases energy in the ecosystem. It creates again a clean link to what people really want, and you know, how do we mobilize our energy to do something special. So culture, I would say, is very definitely there, and I think we have to be mindful that it doesn't that we don't live with the old culture too long.
And I like the fact you've connected the dots between having really pursuing that broader societal purpose, and the only way we really can successfully do that is by cultivating these ecosystems. I think you're 100% right about that. Let me go back to a couple of questions here in the chat. So Waleed wanted to know, how could or should this ecosystem concept be applied to the K through 12 and university education settings, the primary, secondary, post-secondary education worlds? Any ideas or thoughts on that one?
Well, I think first is trying to understand what are the dynamics going on there, right? So what we would do typically in a workshop is actually prototype the ecosystem the way it is now, and then we start to understand who are the actors and what are the concrete elements of that ecosystem, but also what are the underlying patterns and dynamic in the ecosystem. And if you start prototyping, you start to have a visual and even an emotional connection to what is locked, and what could be what is the energy that can be unlocked. You start to understand what it's related to, a certain set of maybe a culture or a certain set of actors that are too present or dominant, or power is not shared, etc. And then you do the next stage of the exercise, which is what is ready to be unlocked in this ecosystem, and where does that change? Where would change come from? So in the case of, I'm not specialist of K-12 education, but it would be interesting to do an exercise like this to actually see what is the reason that maybe there isn't the value creation that we would want to see in that sector, and what are the dynamics that could be unlocked in the easiest way possible, because you can get a sense also of what is mature to move, and maybe now you come in as an actor. Whoever you are, a teacher, a collective of teachers, or maybe with some other organizations, to nudge that dynamic, so that you're kind of unlocking the first bit that can be unlocked in this ecosystem.
That's a good exercise. Sounds like really prototyping the ecosystem. I mean, it kind of, in a way, I think goes back to some of the work that's been done in the past with value chain models and value web analysis, and how does value interchange between them, and how does that come together to create the broader value. So I think it's a great exercise. So thank you. I also wanted to the last few comments here, kind of pick on what Barbara had mentioned. She worked at Mars for many years, I think in New Jersey. And when she was at Mars, they mapped the genome of the cocoa plant and shared that with others in the hopes of protecting the crops for all of those working in the chocolate industry. They didn't just keep the map to themselves, but they share it with everyone. Yeah. And I think that's exactly the whole thing. And I see that happening more and more. I see it in the coffee industry. I see it definitely in the chocolate industry, where they're actually saying, "Hey, look, let's pull back the curtains and show everyone in the world what this industry, who the players are, what happens." From the very farmers to the processors to the big corporates and everyone, and what happens, and sometimes that's revealing, like, well, the farmers are only getting this much, and they're doing all the hard work, and the marketers are getting this much, right? So, but I guess I give them credit for the transparency, but they're also looking at it from a complete ecosystem standpoint. So, I guess you're seeing that too. Are you seeing more of that? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of back to this. So I briefly mentioned the Roche example, and so in the healthcare industry, so in order to realize this promise of precision medicine, you need a lot of data, and so in every country, it's a different context. I was talking about the Canadian context here, where Roche needed to access data. Now, in a culture, in a society like Canada, nobody in their right mind will allow a pharma company to concentrate all of the data and own all of the data to themselves. So what they've done is collaborate with other actors, patient organizations, research organizations, the government, etc., other pharma, and they've structured a not-for-profit around it, and the not-for-profit as a whole decides what are the rules by which we acquire data, and how can we all use this data without owning it in a proper way that works, right? So I think this is a really fantastic, these are very inspiring examples of unlocking, I like to call it a common, right? And so it's like a public common before the ecosystem, where you create an asset and then everybody can benefit from the asset. So that's always there in a form or another, whether through a collective or through Tesla sharing the patents for free. That's another way that's very connected to that, of doing that to unlock value at the ecosystem level without thinking just business, purely business.
Okay. There's a couple more, if you have time, there's a couple more
I do.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good, that's fine. Um, Waleed wanted to know if you could comment on the role of AI relating to this topic in the future. So where does AI play a role? As everyone wants to know, where does AI play a role in anything anymore? Where does it play a role in up-ruption and ecosystems and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't have the ultimate crystal ball, but what I see so far is, in many ways, AI is a tool on steroids, right? So, and with any or technology on steroids, and part of the answer here, I think, is that it's the same story as with other technologies, in the sense that if we get excited with the technology itself, of course, we can go into this rabbit hole of creating fantastic, amazing, exciting things. But I'm part of this. You know, I have colleagues that are doing a lot of that, and every time they come up with something new, I'm like, oh my god, amazing, amazing, and it's exciting. But there is a difference between getting excited by the technology and actually using this technology in order to lift this, you know, to basically put the technology at the service of a higher vision. And so I think it's the same in every situation where you have a new amazing technology, technical capabilities. Fine, you know, let's embrace it. Let's not say no, you know, resist it. I don't think there's a lot of you know, future in resisting it. But can we make it subservient to a higher goal, to this higher goal of unleashing new value creation for the ecosystem? And so if we don't do that, I fear that we kind of stay in the same logic of value creation, which is, you know, this healthcare has been done in a certain way, so it's going to accelerate the way it's going to be done. You know, that logic kind of works right now. Same with education, same with everything. But if we use it in order to serve a vision of, you know, higher value creation, then I think it can be very useful.
Excellent. And there's a question here from Lean. I'm not sure that I fully understand the question. So Lean, you may need to uh, elaborate and explain the question more, but I'll try to read it and see if we can understand it. Do you think that the ecosystem plays in the mind of people and investors and causes a bias, rate, neglect, and conjunction fallacy? I'm not fully
So, Lean,
understanding
if you're
the
with
question.
us,
Lean, if
yeah.
you want to unmute and ask this question, you're welcome to do so, or explain it better. I'm not fully understanding the question.
Hmm.
Uh,
Bias rate neglect.
or
Sounds like it's referring to something specific. I also am not sure what's the.
okay, yeah. So otherwise we can sort of move on. I think that kind of so one last question. Let's take one last question, and then we'll sort of
Yeah,
wrap it up for the day if we will, because we're
sure.
past the top of the hour. So how can governments how can governments help in the context of ecosystem? Actually, there was another comment too about shouldn't governments actually be playing a lead role here in really facilitating these
Hmm.
ecosystems and developing? And this is a great question. What is the role that government plays? Because like I said, when I've been working in Saudi Arabia, the government is working very
Yeah.
explicitly and diligently to try to promote certain ecosystems. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, whether it's legislation or support or other types of government activities.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So the answer is yes, 100%. If the government is enlightened enough to that's a great role for governments to play and to intervene in places that are too risky for businesses to take ownership themselves. So I was just in Singapore working with one of those large government agencies, and Singapore is probably one of the key cases there of a government actually trying to figure out what is the right environment, right ecosystem, and shaping those ecosystems so that businesses and other actors can play. And so it's legislation, but it's also finance. It's de-risking experimentations that actors can take together. It's education. It's kind of all these levers of value creation that I shared in my presentation. And they can do this again because they have a longer time frame, longer time horizon. They have the other you know, incentives in terms of creating value for the country as a whole or for the region as a whole. And so, example, Singapore is a great example. It's interesting also to see that this place is being filled. So the story of Alibaba, in many ways, you could say, in 2003 in China, these institutions are not actually are missing. The infrastructure is missing to do e-commerce. Maybe the trust in the economy is missing. And so you have a private actor like Alibaba, of course, working with the government, etc., but kind of taking ownership of those missing pieces. In some African contexts, you see it as well, where the government may not be at the level of creating these ecosystems, and so you have private actors that are kind of filling the void. Of course, it asks all sorts of questions of who then owns the infrastructure, the ecosystem, and all of this value concentration and value sharing and etc. But it's definitely happening.
Yeah, and I would agree. But I think governments have to be careful in how they go about doing this. I don't know that legislation is necessarily the right way, because that may backfire, it may not, it may fail. But I think getting involved with economic development organizations and trying to help as a catalyst create some of this is very helpful. But at the end of the day, if they own the infrastructure and the ecosystem, then businesses may not take ownership of it.
Back off.
Right, they might back off, right? So it's like anything, you want to create an environment where others will take ownership of it, joint ownership. So I think that's you have to play those cards very carefully. I don't think you can go in as a government with a hard hand and lots of legislation. It's more, how can we be the enabler of this ecosystem? How can we be the encourager, maybe a sponsor of this ecosystem? But ultimately, we need all the other players to take ownership and drive it.
Yeah, 100%. And there was also different nature of intervention, or just if you think of infrastructure, right? So, I mean, there's kind of a story of ecosystem creation with the building of roads in the interstate highway system in the US, right?
Yes,
But this is probably a good piece of infrastructure for the government to take care of, right? It's kind of beyond the reach of many of private actors. But so, what is the level? What is the kind of foundational level that government can come and play in without being too managing in terms of what needs to happen in the ecosystem.
You're right. And I 100% agree. There's a specific role that governments can play in developing infrastructure that supports ecosystems without hard-handing them but creating them. So all right. So
exactly.
we'll try again at Lean's question, and this will be our last question for the day, and we're going to wrap it up. So we'll try it. Lean has rephrased it. So what I mean is that, do you believe that the environment creates a cognitive bias for people while they're making decisions that cause businesses to fail? So, in other words, when we're trying to make that shift, you talked about moving higher from the business to the ecosystem. Is this creating some sort of cognitive biases that's actually going to cause the businesses to fail, or does that not happen? So, any thoughts on that is for our last thought here.
I think it's of course you have an ecosystem can be used in many different ways, right? So you have actors that are creating ecosystems to extract more value for the business. But as a general rule, I think this idea, at least this is the hope or the positive message that I see in all of this, is that there's a story of rising to a higher dimension of value creation that's more fit for our time. And so if we are able to kind of embrace this movement, however it happens in different contexts, countries, sectors, I think it can pull people upward. And so in terms of the cognitive bias, I don't know if, this is the full answer to your question, Lean. It sounds like there's more complexity there, but it seems to me that there is a possibility for an upward movement for all, lifting all boats, for everybody to start embracing and following a higher level playing field and playing at a higher level playing field. And it is both a very practical thing. How do I move pieces around? And a mindset thing in the heads of leaders, people, employees, organizations, etc.
Yeah. So that's a great answer, and I would agree. And I think Barbara mentioned this too. And a rising tide raises all boats. And I think that's the environment we see in ecosystems is Actually, what I see is it doing is it's democratizing the benefits for more and more parties. You know, in the past,
Hmm.
it was like one party got all the benefit at the expense of all the other parties. But
Hmm.
ecosystems are actually driving a lot of transparency. And so a given party may actually make less profit than they did previously, but
Hmm.
it's not that they're going to fail, it's just that they're not going to be as profitable and big as they were otherwise. But now 1,000 other organizations are going to prosper as well. And you know, we're democratizing the whole benefit in the ecosystem such that we're spreading the wealth out, if you will, you know, and we're
Hmm.
spreading that out, and more parties are benefiting. And I think that's the beauty of ecosystems is it does create this whole environment and this transparency where more parties benefit, and it's less concentrated into any single party, but we spread the benefit out broader.
Yeah, yeah,
So with
absolutely.
yeah, with that, any last closing comment before I wrap it up, Greg?
Just that I think this is an evolving kind of emergent type of study, and so if anyone has stories to share and or different viewpoints, etc., they're welcome to share them. Happy. I think I've shared my email early on, so happy to continue the conversation.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Greg. I really appreciate your insights into Up-ruption and the ecosystems. Very, very wonderful insights. And I want to thank everyone who's here with us today, as well as everyone who's watching our recording of this webinar. Thank you for your participation in Global Innovation Institute's efforts to continue developing our knowledge around the world of innovation and transformation. So with that, have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you next month. Take
Thank
care.
you, Anthony. Thank you, everyone.